think we should start right now. We are waiting for Professor Miriam Motibi to join us, but I think she will do so in upcoming minutes. So let's start with our third webinar. We previously discussed other issues related to research integrity, and today we are going to focus on plagiarism and copyright issues in oncology. As you remember, we discussed predatory publishing and data manipulation and retractions in oncology, which are widespread issues related to cancer research, particularly in low and middle-income countries. So today we are focusing on something else. It's also dangerous and it's also frequent in our setting in Africa, which is something that you already know, plagiarism and copyright concerns in the field of oncology. So before starting, these are my competing interests, and this is very important. And it's also important to notice that the opinions shared in this webinar are my own and does not really reflect perspectives of my own institution. So I think the best way to start with is something related to the history of plagiarism in research. The first case of plagiarism discussed in the history of science was by a poet called Marcus Valerius Martialis, who wrote poems, and he realized that someone else in another city recites his poems as it is his own. So he sent him a letter, and let me just read it for you. Fame has it that you, Fidenius, recites my books to the crowd as if none other than your own. If you are willing that they be called mine, I'll send you the poems for free. If you want them to be called yours, buy this one so that they won't be mine. So this was the letter sent by Marcellus to the other poets to ask him to not use his text without citing the resource. So to the best of our knowledge, this is the first case of plagiarism to be reported in the literature. And before going to the definitions of plagiarism as per international standards based on COP definitions, I would like to share one question with you. So please, Bilmira, could you please share the poll with participants to see if they have any knowledge related to plagiarism?
Thank you. Sky, will you? There we go. Thank you.
Yeah, so what is the correct definition of plagiarism according to you? Please try to select the right answer, and then we will further develop the perspectives in our discussion based on your answers. So you have 1 minute to respond. Please try to answer the poll so we can have an idea about your knowledge about plagiarism. We have only 14 participants who responded. The others, could you please participate? I would like really to see this webinar interactive. So if you have any questions, comments, just unmute yourself and then stop me, and then I will be very happy to discuss perspectives. But before doing so, please try to answer the questions on the screen. Okay, I see that only 14 participants responded. The other one, they won't respond. So let's check the results. Could you please share the results, Bilmira? Bilmira, do you receive me?
I hear you, Sky. Are you able to share results?
Okay, yeah. Could you please share the results?
I've shared the results.
So these are the results on the screen. So unfortunately, you didn't select the best response, and all of them are correct. So this means that all the proposals are correct. So let's go further. Okay, so I think the best definitions provided to date is that from the COP guidelines organization. So it's an organization that provided recommendations for journals, for authors, for reviewers, and also editors to manage the issues related to research integrity. So the COP guidelines define plagiarism as when somebody presents the work of others, including data, words, theories, etc., as if they were his, her own, and without proper acknowledgement. So this means that when you take text ideas from someone else, but you don't really add the reference, the source where you took that text or idea. There is something missing in these definitions, is that adding a reference, adding a source is not enough. You need always to produce original text based on your understanding, your appraisal of that text, your source text, and then you need to paraphrase it and provide an original text, and then you need to cite. So a citation only is not enough, so you need always to provide original text. And there are a lot of common types of plagiarism, as you already know. Maybe there is something called complete plagiarism. Complete plagiarism is when you take the whole text from another author and provide it to others like it's yours, and it's submitting someone else's work in their own name. This means that you take the entire paper, the entire manuscript, and you reference it as it's yours. One very important example to share with you related to this first type of plagiarism is when, for example, a young resident in medicine or a PhD student write an article, and then someone else, like his supervisor, another collaborator, takes the whole paper and add his name as first author, as if it is him who wrote the paper. So this is widespread in low and income countries. We totally understand that in a lot of cases, there is this hierarchy where your supervisor, another author, can take your own work and submit it as it is his own. And this is frequent. I saw some cases related to this in Morocco, and it's very bad. Also, when, for example, a young resident goes to, for example, a fellowship in Europe and finds a very interesting thesis in the department when he works that belongs to someone else, and then when he comes back to his own country, he publishes it as it is his own. So we saw these examples too. I know some people, for example, where their papers were retracted because they took a thesis from an European institution and they published it as it is his own research, unfortunately. So this is called something complete plagiarism. There is also direct plagiarism. It is when you copy just a part of a manuscript of another researcher. So all of these examples, we are going to discuss them in the details coming in the next slides. There is also something called paraphrasing plagiarism. It's when you reuse another author work and change few words or phrases. So this means that you take a previously published text and then you just add some synonyms and also change some small parts in those paragraphs. There is also something called self-plagiarism, when you republish the same work you did previously. For example, you produced a thesis, and then when you defend it, you use the same text from the same thesis as an article, and you publish it in another work. There is also something called mosaic plagiarism, is when you copy parts of others' text and embed it into your own sentence. This means that you have your own sentence, you originally produce it, and you take some other parts of other previously published text and you add it into your own sentence to make it more attractive. Also, there is something called source-based plagiarism, is when the writer might cite reference correctly, but present them in a misleading way. This means that you, for example, you find a very interesting idea in an article, you paraphrase that, you put it into your new manuscript, but you don't cite the right reference. For example, you cite a review that discussed that idea, but you don't cite the original reference that discussed this idea or this data. There is also something very frequent in Morocco or also in some African setting. It is called accidental plagiarism. It is when you plagiarize, but you don't know it's plagiarism. So it is very, very frequent. People plagiarize and it's unintentional. This means that they take text, they add reference, and they think it's not plagiarism. So they don't paraphrase, for example. So this is something called accidental plagiarism. So this is just a starting point about plagiarism, and let's discuss this point further. So what is not plagiarism? What is not plagiarism is when you generate original text based on your understanding and appraisal of the literature and you cite the resource. When you generate text without citing the reference, it's plagiarism. And when you generate text without paraphrasing and citing the resource, it's also plagiarism. So the best thing to do to avoid plagiarism is to generate original text based on your understanding and also add the right resource, the right reference where you find that information. So the question is that should you paraphrase everything in the literature? I mean, when you find something like a citation, recommendations of international societies for medical practice, for example, do you need to paraphrase all of that? So of course, no. In some cases, you should not paraphrase. What are these cases? Let's start with this paper I published several years ago about predicting therapy response in ovarian cancer. And I needed to cite and to reproduce some international guidelines. I didn't paraphrase them because it is prohibited. You should not paraphrase international guidelines. So what should be done in this case? You need just to copy the same recommendations provided in these international guidelines, put them between quotes in italic and add reference. As you can see here in this slide, in this picture, I put all of these recommendations in italic. This is the first advice. The second advice, it's between quotes. And the third advice is that you need to cite the reference. So in this case, you should not paraphrase this kind of text from international society guidelines. One another example from one of my other articles I published recently, in the introduction to this paper, you will see that I used a citation from a poet called Martial. It's the same we discussed in the first slide. In this case, I should not paraphrase. I should, as I said, put it in italic between quotes and also add the reference. So in this case, in other cases where text should not be paraphrasable, should not be rephrased, then you need to respect these guidelines, put in the text you take between quotes in italic and also add in the reference. Unfortunately, when you check the papers retracted in Cancer Research, you will realize that plagiarism is one of the reasons why journals retract papers. And unfortunately, this is widespread in African setting. Let's start with this example. This is something called direct plagiarism. This means that the authors, they took some parts of other previously published articles as it's their own text, but it's not the case. So this is something called direct plagiarism, and it's very frequent, unfortunately. And unfortunately, again, the journals, they don't sometimes check plagiarism before acceptance letter being sent to the author. So this is a very, very important note for you. When you send your paper to a journal, you should be aware that in a lot of cases, journals do not check for plagiarism. It's until the paper is being published, then other authors can check the text, they verify, then they can write to the journal to say that you have plagiarism, for example, and then there is no solution and the journal retracts the paper. So in this case, for example, the journal could detect plagiarism before publishing, but unfortunately, they didn't use their software for that. Just to say to all participants that in a lot of cases, journals do not verify plagiarism in articles, even if they have the software available. It depends on a lot of factors like the availability of the editor, his time, etc. So the paper we were talking about was retracted. And on PubMed, when you do your literature search, you will find that it has a notice that showing that the paper was retracted. So you should not really cite it or consider it as a reference for your future projects. And this is something that will never disappear from PubMed. This means that when you do plagiarism and your article is retracted, then it's bad, very bad. This means that all people around the world will realize that you have did plagiarism, and it's something traceable, and all of researchers can see that on indexing database. This is another example of complete plagiarism. This author of this paper was in France for a fellowship in a department where he found a very interesting thesis that was not published yet. So when he comes back to his own country, he took that thesis and published it as it is his own research. So he just published the whole thesis as an article, and then later it was retracted because the author of that department asked the journal to retract it because it's his own research. So this is something called complete plagiarism. The take-home message from this case is that the day you take other people's thesis, you can be very happy when it is published, but later it will be retracted, and it's very bad. So please don't think about it. Don't think about taking other people's works. This is another example where an article was retracted because of plagiarism. And unfortunately, the authors were not serious. They didn't respond to a correspondence of the journal to explain why they did plagiarism. Because in some cases, you can protect yourself. If, for example, you did some unintentional plagiarism or some small parts being taken from other resources, and the article is being retracted, you can explain this to the scientific community and say that it was an error from yourself and you apologize to the scientific community. But in this case, unfortunately, the authors did not respond to the journal about this issue. And of course, the article was retracted. And this is very bad for young scientists that do not care for quality and the career they are building. This is to say that plagiarism is not particular or specific to Africa or other low and income countries. It is widespread. It is prevalent in other high income countries. This is an example of plagiarism and data manipulation in an article from a prominent cancer researcher in high income countries. So this means that you are not alone. Other people, even if they belong to very prestigious institutions, also do plagiarism. Where to track plagiarized texts retracted? In fact, there is a database called Retraction Watch database. It was developed by Ivan Oransky, and I will discuss this later. So Ivan Oransky was a medical doctor, particularly interested by the field of research integrity. He developed a database. It's transparent, public, where all authors can see the articles that are retracted from the literature. So you need just to put the name of the country, and you can see that there is a lot of papers retracted because of plagiarism. So Ivan Oransky is, as I said, a medical doctor that was highly interested in delivering transparent information about retraction. So he built a database. It's open source, available, transparent, and funded by great international organizations to support research integrity. So just look at the website. You will find very interesting cases of plagiarism of very well-known researchers, even from Africa. And there is also a lot of take-home messages from that database and also the website as shown here in this slide. So this is an example of the database from some articles of Moroccan researchers that were retracted. Unfortunately, you can see here that a lot of reasons why these articles were retracted, it's because of plagiarism. So plagiarism, and unfortunately, unintentional plagiarism is very frequent in our city. This is also to say that even politicians can plagiarize. So very interesting cases are reported on retractionwatch.com, as I said previously. So this is the case of a vice chancellor of a university where he admitted that he did plagiarism. This is just to say to young scientists with us today that plagiarism is not particular or specific to Africa. Even people that are well-known, well-qualified, well-trained, they do plagiarism. Unfortunately, medical journals in Africa are known for having plagiarism. And as you can see here in this paper from Nature, around 63% of articles from 100 simple journals were found to have copied text without attribution. So this means that it is really frequent in our African setting, and we need to discover this further to see what are the factors associated with this high prevalence of plagiarism in our setting. So to do so, I developed one project in Morocco, and I was very happy when it was published. This was the first article I published related to research integrity, and starting from that day, I am particularly interested right now to do more research in that. So we explored the scientific misconduct in Morocco based on an analysis of plagiarism perception to see what are these factors that encourage people in Morocco to do plagiarism. So the paper was published in Accountability and Research, and they will be very happy to share some of the findings we had together with participation of very great people from Morocco, like Professor Nadir Qadmiri and my Professor Mariam Fortasi, who were very interested to supervise me in this project. So these are some early findings of the study. We appraised, in fact, we assessed knowledge of Moroccan scientists, and we recorded more than 1,200 responses from undergraduate students, scientific graduates, PhD students, PhD doctors, and postdoctoral fellows, and also university professors. So this was the first study that assessed plagiarism among university professors, and that was very interesting. So we had a lot of participants from all categories, and based on our multivariable model, we found that people plagiarize because they don't know it was plagiarism. As you can see here in this table of adjusted multivariable analysis, unintentional plagiarism was very frequent and increased the odds of having the researcher doing plagiarism by more than 100 fold. And the result was very highly statistically significant. This means that Moroccan researchers, they do plagiarism without knowing it was plagiarism. And when they asked them why they do that, they say that taking the text from other resources and adding the reference is enough. No, it is not enough. You need always to produce original text. So people think that adding a reference is enough, and this is not the case, of course. Another interesting result we found is that time constraint to write original text was also associated with plagiarism. This means that people plagiarize because they think or they don't have time to do or to provide original text. And also they don't know how to paraphrase. This means that unfortunately in French-speaking countries, people don't know how to paraphrase because, you know, all publications are in English, and providing and producing English-based literature is somehow difficult for them because they don't speak English. Also, promisingly, when these people found that plagiarism or believes that plagiarism is a serious issue, they did less plagiarism. This means that when you increase awareness about these issues, about retractions related, plagiarism related retractions, people are aware of that and they do not do plagiarism. So I think this is something that we can also generalize on other settings in Africa, particularly in those countries where English is not their first language. So as I said, unintentional plagiarism again and again is one of the factors that increases the risk of doing plagiarism in Africa. So what to do? Of course, training is the best, but what kind of training? That is the good question. In fact, I found a very interesting systematic review published by Cochrane Library In fact, they provided some evidence that increasing awareness about plagiarism is not enough. You need to provide training, I mean, active training to young scientists with the use of practical exercises on how to write. This means that even if you do increasing awareness, it's not enough. You need to show to people how to write. That is the best active way to have less plagiarism in our science. What to do also, there are other things that we can do in addition to training. And in this perspective, I would like to, again, thank the OurTech for this initiative and for hosting our webinars. In fact, one thing that you can do is to improve awareness, to improve transparency, sorry. How can we improve transparency about plagiarism? In fact, let me just show you one example. I am very transparent, and I can share this with you. This is one of my papers I published several years ago. As you can see, it's not about plagiarism, of course. It's about the prediction of response to treatments in oncology using microbiota. But what is particular in this paper? In fact, if you read the acknowledgement part of this paper, you will realize that I shared publicly and transparently the plagiarism reports with all people around the world. This means that when you read the paper, you want to check if it has plagiarism or not. Just go to the acknowledgement part. You will find a supplemental material where you find the plagiarism reports using the Turnitin or iAuthenticator software, and it's public, it's transparent. So if researchers do that, share publicly the plagiarism reports of all of their science, then that will be great. We will have this trust in you and the trust in science. So if you agree with me, try to share your plagiarism reports publicly with all participants, with all scientists, and then there will be confidence in your science you are producing. I have some take-home messages to participants, and I will be very happy to respond to all the questions later. I know it's not perfect because I have a lot of knowledge to share, but unfortunately, because of time, I am just giving you some take-home messages here. So always generate an original text based on your understanding, and remember to cite the reference. This means that citing the reference is not enough. You need to provide original text. You read an article, you understand what they mean, you have your own appraisal of that data, then just write your original text based on your knowledge and cite the reference. That is the best way to prevent doing plagiarism. Of course, not all text available is paraphrasable. Recommendations, citations, international guidelines should never be paraphrased. So this should be taken as it is, must be quoted in italic and cite the right reference, as I showed previously to you. Always check plagiarism before you submit. This is very, very important take-home message. Why I am saying this to you? You need to check plagiarism before you submit, even if you are confident in your text, because sometimes you do unintentional plagiarism. So you think it's not plagiarism, but it is. And the issue is that journals do not check for plagiarism in a lot of cases. I am an editor in various journals, and I know how they work. Their hidden agenda in some cases, and not some, it's a lot of cases. They don't check for plagiarism because the editors, they are overwhelmed with the number of manuscripts being submitted. They don't have time. Sometimes the software is not available, etc. So the journals think, and they believe, in fact, that the text you are submitting to a journal is your responsibility. So once your article is being published, it's your own responsibility in relation to the originality of the text. So once they detect that it has some plagiarism, then they will retract it. Okay, so be careful. Always check plagiarism before you submit if you have software. If not, then at the end of this presentation, I will provide you some help. So you need also to understand that significant overlap equals retractions. When you do plagiarism, and it's something you cannot really defend, then the article is going to be retracted, as I said previously. So your name and that of your co-authors will publicly appear on the retraction database. For example, if the first author did plagiarism and the other authors just corrected or reviewed the content, then if later the article is being retracted, it's not only the responsibility of the first author, it's the responsibility of all authors. So always check the text of your collaborators and co-authors, even if you are just a co-author, because your name one day can be publicly shown on this database, it might ruin your academic life. All authors, as I said, in a work are responsible for its content. So you should not blame first author for plagiarism. If you don't have any questions, then I will be very happy to go ahead and discuss this chapter number 2. If you have any questions about this chapter, please unmute yourself and let's hear your voice.
Thanks so much, Khalid. I think that was an excellent introduction to really just the concepts around plagiarism. I think maybe one of the questions that I had is, assuming you've had sort of accidental plagiarism and you didn't realize you actually have plagiarized yourself, then what are the sort of rescue mechanisms that you have in order to correct that? How do you sort of navigate that?
Okay, so if I understood your question, for example, you have already published a paper and later you discover that there is some overlap. So
Yes.
And the journal sent you an email to say that it has plagiarism and it's going to be retracted. So I think there are 2 recommendations in this perspective, and it depends on the editors in those journals. So if, for example, there is an editor that is very, very serious, then he will say, okay, this is plagiarism. It should not be discussed. There is evidence suggesting that you did plagiarism, that it's going to be retracted. In this case, in the correspondence letter that are going to be published with the retraction, the authors should respond to the editor by explaining to the scientific community that it was unintentional and it was an error from the team. So you always need to be transparent and defend scientific community. You apologize to the scientific community. So people, when they will read the notice, they will realize that you were aware of that and you apologize. The bad thing is that when authors, they did plagiarism and they don't respond to the notice, they didn't mention anything, they don't respond to emails. So this is bad. And I think there are some ethical retractions in this case. When the retraction is ethical, this means that the authors agree. They know it's bad, they did that error, but they apologize to the scientific community. And in some other cases, for example, if the overlap is not significant, it is just a small part that was unintentional, as I said, or it was an error from one author, then you can ask the editor to make a corrigendum, and there you can provide the original text being rephrased, and then you explain why it was an error, etc. But I think this depends on the journal editors. In some cases, in some journals, the editors are very flexible. They can allow you to do that. But in other cases, they are very strict, and then they do retractions. And then you have the only way to apologize is from that correspondence notice, where you can apologize and explain to the scientific community why that happened, to the best of my knowledge, of course.
Thanks, Khalid. I'm trying to see whether there's any questions or comments around. Kehinde Okunade, go ahead.
Thank you, Miriam. Yeah, thank you, Khalid, for that beautiful insight. I just want to know, how do you avoid the self-plagiarism? If you have previously published a protocol of a study you want to conduct, and when you finish the final work, you also want to, how do you prevent, you have to paraphrase your own words in the new manuscript? Thank you.
That's a very, very interesting question and note. In fact, we know that in a lot of fields in medicine, like oncology, people publish their protocols before providing the whole data as original text. So in these cases, a lot of journals understand that, and they can allow you to reproduce the same protocol, and it will not be considered as plagiarism. And there are also some recommendations for this. For example, in the method section, you can just describe very rapidly your protocol, its original text, and then you say, as previously discussed, or something like that, because you have already your protocol published. In some other journals, they don't allow that. For example, if you have a method section published in another article and you want to reproduce it, they will say to you, if you want to reproduce that, why are you doing so? You can provide the same protocol, same method section, but with another way. This means that you can always paraphrase that method section with a new style, with a new text, with the same ideas there being protected. So it depends on the journals, but for protocols of clinical trials, protocols of observational studies, you can always reproduce the protocol or cite it in the methods by just describing very rapidly your methods, and it is allowed by a lot of journals. But I think you need to check the instructions of authors of these journals, because they should say something about that, and the editor is responsible in this case. I hope I answered your question.
Thanks, Khalid. I'm just seeing an interesting question from Huzaifa. I don't know if you want to ask it out loud.
Yes, please, be free.
Huzaifa, Imam? I don't know if maybe they have a problem with their network, but she's asking quite an interesting question around, is the use of AI writing assistants, of course, going back to ChatGPT, considered a form of plagiarism too? And is it something that editorial boards or editors screen for? I sometimes fail to find the right words to express the ideas in my head when writing, so I find myself often using these assistants. Maybe if you could just briefly comment on that.
Yeah, I have an opinion and then a comment. In fact, this is a very interesting question. Thanks for that. For my opinion, I strongly believe that we are more smart than artificial intelligence. I mean that our brain has the capacity and the ability to produce a lot of very interesting original text. So you can use artificial intelligence-based assistants just to have some ideas, etc. But using ChatGPT, for example, to produce original text, to paraphrase, is not good. I strongly believe that good scientists, I mean, real scientists, do not use ChatGPT to write text. They use it just maybe to have some ideas, to make ideas together, but you need to produce your own text yourself. So this is my opinion. Regarding the policy of journals, yeah, there is policy. A lot of journals now, they are aware of the use of ChatGPT, and they provide recommendations in their instruction to authors. And to the best of my knowledge, they will not allow you to use text produced by ChatGPT, but they can allow you to have this tool being used just to check for English or to have ideas for discussions, etc. And regarding journals, editors, if they have tools to check if the text is written by humans or by artificial intelligence, to the best of my knowledge, to date, we don't have these softwares yet. We don't have these tools yet. So unfortunately, in a lot of cases, there are some smart authors that use ChatGPT and they publish without the editors can handle that and identify that it was written by AI assisted tools. But in a lot of other cases, authors are not smart. For example, they just copy the text provided by ChatGPT, and when we read that text, we can easily recognize that those sentences are not written by humans. And in other cases, they copy some information that is not really relevant to their text. So when an editor or a reviewer detects that, then it can be bad, because they are going to reject your paper immediately. And unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of papers being published in international oncology journals, and in a lot of cases, as I said, they were discussed using ChatGPT. But to date, there is no software, no tool available for journals to verify if it's brain produced or AI produced.
And I think thanks, Khalid. And I think maybe as a follow-up to that, another thought-provoking question is really a follow-up to that. Like, is there, and this is from Huzaifa again, is there an acceptable level, air quotes, of level of plagiarism that a research work is expected to not go beyond? Is there like a bare minimum or a maximum that you need to have
Okay.
before people say this is blatantly.
Yes, this is also a very interesting question, and this is adding more information to our presentation. And so I am very thankful for that. So the percentages are very subjective, and they are provided by universities, by some journals that may allow you to do some plagiarism. But ethically talking, using international standards of publishing and integrity, you should not have any plagiarized sentence. Let me give you an example. If, for example, there is an author who wrote an article, I detected based on my software that he has like 30% of plagiarism. When I check the content, it's just some small parts that exist in other papers, and it's not really plagiarism. It's because of the references. So I exclude the references. I check every part of the manuscript. Then the percentage is highly reduced to 20%, for example. But when I check the quality of the text I am reading, it is not plagiarism, even if the percentage is 20%. So now let me give you the contrary example. If I detect, for example, that one author has only 5% plagiarism, but when I check the text, I found one whole paragraph was copied from other resources. So this is plagiarism, even if the percentage is very low. You understand now? This means that there is no acceptable percentage. The recommendation here is that you should not plagiarize. In the whole of your manuscript, you should have original text. And I strongly believe that the brain of a human is highly developed, and it can always provide very interesting text with millions of different ways. So as an editor, I don't believe in percentages. That's my opinion.
Thanks, Khalid. And I think that sort of is a segue into one of the concepts that people don't sort of necessarily think about, which is basically mosaic plagiarism, where you kind of take little text and you say, I'm going to change a few words here, a few words there, somebody else's, and then now that is my idea of paraphrasing. That is still considered plagiarism. And I think you've heard it from here that there isn't any acceptable amount. So strive as much as possible to come up with original ideas. And I think there's another question from Moses Chubamba. I don't know if you want to ask it out loud. Moses?
You can also ask your questions in French if you want.
Yes. I think Moses, he might be a little on. I think he was asking about, he was just making a great comment about plagiarism not being limited to text-based content, which is absolutely true. It can also involve images, data, and ideas. And then he's asking, how can researchers ensure proper attribution when using visual elements or incorporating ideas from others?
That's a very interesting question, and the answer is in the second chapter we are going to discuss in some seconds. So I am going to discuss how to reuse pictures, for example, visual elements, as you said, without having concerns with that. So this is the objective of this second chapter we are going to discuss, if you don't have any other questions.
I think that's a nice segue into the next part. So take it away, Khalid.
Okay, thank you so much, Miriam, and happy to see you here. I think you had a very busy schedule today. Okay, so in this chapter, we're going to discuss copyright issues, and particularly images, visual elements, etc. Let's start with this. In fact, some authors reused figures from other resources as they are their own figures, and later the paper discovered that the figures do not belong to those authors, and it was retracted. So I think this is a very important starting point to say that science, very serious journals do not play with these kind of things. Plagiarism, reusing of other authors' figures is not allowed without respecting international guidelines. So I think this is the objective of my slides right now. I think the best thing to start with is how to reuse a picture already published. For example, you have an anatomy figure that interests you. you have a histopathological analysis or something like immunohistochemistry, or other figures related to signaling pathways, for example. They are very beautiful. You love them. You want to reuse them into your own manuscript. How to do that? So there are two cases, only two cases. So let's start with something we call the license CC BY 4.0. The CC BY 4.0 is a license for open access. For example, if you have published an article open access and it has some pictures, then another author can reuse the same material, the same pictures by just adding the reference. This means that, for example, if you are an author, you want you are preparing a manuscript, you want to reproduce another picture from another published article. If that article is published as open access and verify if the license is CC BY 4.0, then you can just take it as it is without any changes and put the reference. So this is the international guidelines for this kind of pictures taken from open access articles. But the other case is more difficult. When your article is not open access, and this is something frequent in hybrid journals, and you need to subscribe to check the content behind the wall. So in this case, the article source does not belong to the author. It belongs to the journal because it's not open access. When it is open access, it belongs to the author. But when it is not open access, it belongs to the journal. So you need to have a copyright license from the publisher. So you need to ask for copyright reuse, and is something very required. If they identify later that you have reused one picture from their journal and you didn't have the license, then they will retract it, as I said in my first slide of this chapter. So let's practically discuss this more. For example, we have this article I published several years ago. You are reading it. For you, it's interesting, and it has a picture that you want to reuse. For example, here on the database where you can find the article on Science Direct, go to the article page, check something called Get Rights and Contents. Get Rights and Contents button here, as shown here. You need to click on that, and then it will allow you to go to something called Copyright Clearance Center. There, you can make a selection. They will ask you some questions. Why are you going to use this material? In what kind of resources are you going to publish that? For example, here you can make a selection like reusing in a medical journal or something like that, in a thesis, etc. Then you follow the steps. You will add your name, your institution, the title of your new article. Are you going to use the figure without changing it, etc. So some technical details that are very easy. And then you will download, as shown here in the right of my screen, something called the copyright license. The copyright license is an agreement, is a PDF file that gives you rights and also gives rights to the journal. So when you have this document, then you have the right to reuse that material without any problem. And so the journal will not have any right to retract the article when they identify that you have reused it. So you need to have this document always on your computer. Practically, what should this is another case. I am going to give you more information about this later. So this is another case. For example, in one of my papers I published several years ago, I reused this picture that was available in a website of a pharmaceutical industry company. So I contacted the pharmaceutical company by email and I asked if they can allow me to reuse it. So I reused it after they give me permission, because it does not belong to an article that is open access and it is not published in hybrid journal. So in this case, you need sometimes send emails to the copyright owner. And in this case, it was pharmaceutical industry. Practically, when you have reused a picture like here, this survival Kaplan-Meier curves in my paper, when I used that, I had that agreement, I downloaded it, But when you read the agreement, you need to state this just near of the picture in the title legend. You need to write this: reprinted from, the name of the journal, the title, etc. And you need to add at the end, with permission from LCB. So this is something allowed based on the agreement. You can reuse those pictures without any issue, but until you have the agreement. And this is for cases where the resource, the reference where you are taking your picture is not open access. I mean, it's a subscription-based paper. If you need to know more about this, if, for example, you are working in another resource setting, you like training on resource integrity, ethics, publishing, and all of these things related to academia and your career development, please take a look at this paper we published recently in GCO Global Oncology, where we provide some practical tools and guidelines for young oncologists working in resource-limited setting, so they can publish excellence by respecting integrity of research. There are also a series of papers we published in the ASCO connection. Just go there and you can find some recommendations from my humble experience in this field. Be aware that we have another upcoming webinar where we are going to discuss this time the paper mills. The paper mills is something called also the fake science industry. And we are going also to discuss some other issues in research integrity. And this will be the latest webinar related to research integrity before going to a new kind of webinars. We are going to discuss evidence-based medicine, how to operate meta-analysis, and also some issues related to gender inequity in the field of oncology. I think that's it. Thank you so much for watching my presentation, for your very important questions. Thanks for Miriam Motivi for her moderation. Thanks for the Awartik for recent webinars, for our hidden faces related to this research integrity series. Bilmira, Sky, they did great work for us. They are always there to help. So thanks again, and I will be very, very happy to take all the other questions.
Thanks. Thanks once again, Khalid. I'm just trying to check the to see if there's any comments or if anyone's raised their hands. Not yet, but perhaps to start us off, maybe one of the things that people usually ask about is sort of getting images, even if it's not for publication, like using them for PowerPoint or using them in a presentation that you then present in a public forum. So perhaps maybe just to give the audience, what are the rules and regulations around that, and a sense of what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable and stuff.
Yeah, that's also a very, very interesting comment and question. And we saw this a lot in oncology meeting. So, for example, in fact, this depends on the recommendations of international oncology societies. For example, when you are reusing material from a NASCO event presentation or ESMO event presentation, they mention in slide that the content should not be reused without permission from the ASCO or from the ESMO or from other authors, for example. So it depends really. If the article, if the figure or pictures or content is from a journal, then I think there is no issue. Just put the reference at the end of your slide. This is something ethical. And once they say to you why you reuse that, at last, or at least you will defend yourself by saying that you added the reference. So for content reused from journals, books in your presentation for your forum or your meeting, if I say the reference is a journal, then there is no issue. Just put the reference. But if the material being reused is from an international cancer society meeting, then you need permission from that society. Unfortunately, this is their regulation based on the law. But again, it depends on their real policy, because I see a lot of meeting where people reuse materials from other authors, conferences or other international societies meeting, but there is no issue, just they put a reference. But when you check the instructions of those societies, they are very clear about, they say that it's not allowed, you need permission from us. So I think it depends on the author's perspective. But I think the final conclusion is that always make the reference, always cite the reference, and then everything will be okay.
Yeah.
But
Thanks,
if you have any other comments or knowledge or information about this, I will be very happy to learn with you too.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent comment about really always acknowledging. And if we just sort of put it in the mindset that you always acknowledge work that isn't yours, whether you're trying to paraphrase it or come up with new ideas. And I think that's a useful concept to have in mind. Ida, you had asked a question. I don't know if you want to ask it again. Oh, that was it.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid, for very clear and informative, excellent presentation. My question is, what if the tables or graphs looks the same? For example, when we are discussing age or presentation of breast cancer. So it could be the same if it is in the same country, and you have to discuss it as a part of your presentation, and even for example, stage of the disease. So it's your own data, it's your own patients, but because of it's in the same country, it looks same. How could this be solved?
I think, and by the way, today you shared a lot of very interesting questions, so I am very happy and proud for that. So thanks again. This depends on your data. So if you have your own original data that you can show to people, and then when they can check the data, they will realize that it's yours. Then there is no issue at all. I don't think that there is any concern if your data are similar to someone else, but you always need to have your own database protected and that you can share publicly if needed. So for me, if you have this data and you want to share them in a slide, just put them there, and you can put between brackets, for example, based on our own investigation, and the database can be shared open requests. So I think there is no issue at all if you have the data available.
Thanks, Khalid, for those comments. I'm just trying to quickly check and see if there's any other comments. No, I think there's just some comments around some AI tools and stuff. I think it's been a really good sort of summary of the different aspects of plagiarism. Perhaps we are sort of doing a segue into the next set of conversations, which is around the fake science industry. And that's really more around global plagiarism, where you're actually just lifting things or even generating entire content that isn't that isn't entirely true at all. And so just to thank you all once again for the your attention and time. And Khalid, you want to say something?
It's just one last slide. I said during my presentation that I will be helpful at the end if they need the software, the Authenticate, which is the only effective software used by journals to check for overlap and plagiarism. So if, for example, you need to check plagiarism before submitting to a journal, I can do that for you for free. And of course, with privacy, you need just to send me an email or contact me by WhatsApp, and I will be very, very happy to share the software with you without any restrictions.
Thanks, Khalid. That's very helpful. I hope you're hearing people on the call. You can sidebar with Khalid, but hopefully you don't actually, hopefully the results will be, authentic, because you haven't plagiarized any aspect of the paper. So I think one of the things that we've said, I think the take-home message is really around really trying to attribute work to acknowledging the authors and anybody else who's contributed to your ideas, whether it's from a visual perspective, whether it's from a discussion perspective, but really trying to ensure that you are generating your original ideas. I think Khalid said it best where he said, the brain, and I would postulate to say the African brain has a lot of capacity for ideas and generation.
Sure.
So of course, we all struggle with language, challenges. English is not our first language for many of speakers on the continent or beyond, but it's really thinking through how do we consolidate your ideas. There's definite tools that you can use to help, but then really ensure that whatever you're presenting as your original work remains exactly that, original in nature. So thank you all once again, and join us next time for the next session around the next research integrity session.